All right, we're going to start. Um, hi everyone. My name is Jennifer Tanner, and Lisa Ferino, my co-host, and I are thrilled to present this introductory webinar, the first in a national series of webinars to protect the ballot, a project of Indivisible Action Coalition in collaboration with the Center for Good Governance and Free Speech for People. It's open to all who want to ensure the security and resilience of elections to counter the Trump MAGA threat. 600 people responded that they wanted to attend, so I do believe there's tremendous receptivity to what we're doing. For those unfamiliar with Indivisible Action Coalition, or IAC for short, we're a network of hundreds of indivisible leaders and grassroots coalition builders who have been taking action together since 2017 to stop Trump, advance pro-democracy causes, and secure a better future for our country. We work at times in conjunction with National Indivisible, and we keep Indivisible leadership apprised of our efforts. Some of you may want to join IAC for short, and we will share information about that in our follow-up emails. And in those emails, we will, of course, include information how to register for the rest of the series of Protect the Ballot action training webinars. Many groups are focused on solving the many challenges to our elections, such as gerrymandering, voter intimidation, purging of voter rolls, and we are so grateful for their hard work. It's needed, but the actual security of our election processes and voting systems have not been addressed enough. The purpose of these much-needed webinars to educate voters about what specifically is needed to make sure our ballots are protected given Trump's attack on our election systems, and how specifically you can do your part. The webinar will be led by election experts Susan Greenhalgh, Free Speech for People, and Marilyn Marks, Coalition for Good Governance. And in our future training webinars, you will hear from other highly regarded national election experts. And here's a bit of housekeeping. So we're going to be together for an hour, with the last 20 minutes of that hour devoted to Q&A. And for those of you who have additional questions, we will stay and be available after that hour. We've muted everyone, so all of you are invited to ask questions in the chat. And we ask once the meeting starts to leave the chat just for the questions. Not a lot of conversation, please. And when you start your question, start with the word ask in caps, and we know it's a question. Remember, this is an intro session to spark your interest about election security issues. In the rest of the series of several webinars, starting in 2 weeks, I believe, we will explore this much more in depth. This issue requires careful study, training, ongoing engagement, and follow-up. It's not just a quick flyover and expressions of alarm. In our webinar series, we will cover in detail the concerns about our election systems, and we will provide the training needed to address those concerns in your local communities or other jurisdictions where you might want to volunteer. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Susan Greenhalgh.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and everyone. It's so exciting to see all of this enthusiasm and so many people excited to be here. It's interesting that when Jennifer had reached out to me about this webinar and she wanted to see what we could be doing to help address election security issues. Marilyn, Marks, and I had already been talking about that. How do we get people engaged? How do we get a wide reach out to these groups? Ideally, Indivisible would be our number one choice. And then I had this very fortuitous conversation with Jennifer, which then got followed up by this um, uh, interview with Representative Jasmine Crockett, who many of you probably know. She's a big hero of mine, with Mark Elias. So I want to play a little segment of this because it's so apropos.
Just like we've been able to show up in record numbers to No Kings Day rallies, I think that the infrastructure that was put together for No Kings We need to take that type of infrastructure. We need to make sure that Indivisible, who's been doing so much great work around the No Kings rallies, starts to translate that into more than a rally, but a training ground, right? A training ground for citizens to know their rights all around the country and know what's what. If you can imagine the number of people that you saw show up in Chicago or LA or some of these places, but now we know that they are all trained up and they understand what it is. And we encourage people to say, hey, I know it may be a big deal, but if you can afford to, we just need you to commit to at least one day off a piece, right? And have people that are trained and know the law and are compassionate and they're showing up. And it's not just the bullies that are right there at the polls, but instead, it's the real people, the people that are fighting for our democracy. So I think that we've got to make sure that we are expanding our thought about what our army should look like. It doesn't just have to be the trained lawyers that we get who take off and they do their thing. It can be lawyers that are training everyday citizens to be armed with the information that they need so that they can be poll watchers, so that they can report in real time, so that we can get into court. So you can get into court quicker and really start to get some emergency orders on things that we see taking place. But we've got to fight like our lives depend on it, because to be perfectly honest, they do. People are literally going to die because of the policies that this administration is pushing, whether it's starvation or whether it's a lack of health care or whether it's the simple fact that like people, I laugh, but it's crazy. Like they are depressing people. Like people are freaking depressed right now. And one of the best things about the recent election was the joy that it injected. Like we just needed some joy for like one day, and it did that.
Okay.
Just like
Oh, sorry. Okay.
just
So
like we've been
sorry, I don't know why that happened. Okay, so that's a pretty clear call to action that we need people across the country prepared to be able to go in and get evidence about how we're voting to make sure that the results of the election reflect the voters' will. That's the most important thing in a democracy, that our election outcomes are the same as the will of the voters. So we developed a little mission statement, and we want to educate, empower, and engage citizens and local leaders to strengthen ballot protections for the 2026 elections in light of the new levels of threats that Trump imposes. We aim to promote and support policies and practices to improve security and provide publicly verifiable election outcomes. That's important. We want to train and mobilize local teams across the country to work directly with county election boards in highly contested jurisdictions to promote practical best practices that make election systems resilient to technology security failures, insider threats, and false claims of hacking and subverted results, and to engage in public oversight to enhance election transparency. So this is really important because, as many of you may know, we are in a different threat landscape than we have faced before. We're reading articles regularly. I'm seeing them coming up in my feed saying that Trump is going to do anything to potentially subvert this election. We can't make any assumptions about the security of any part of the process. We need to be protecting all of it, all hands on deck. If we're looking at how we plan to try and do this, we want to develop evidence of people's votes or collect evidence, gather evidence, make sure that we have access to that evidence that provide transparent, verifiable election outcomes. If we have transparency and verifiability about the way people voted, then it becomes resilient to efforts to disrupt the system. We also want to educate participants to the real threats as well as false claims that may crop up about how resilient systems are, so we can defeat those claims. And this is going to be important because, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later on, but we really need to be clear-eyed about what the threats to our systems are, and not just kind of overstate the security and just to kind of have a warm fuzzy feeling because we need to be on guard. And so that means we need to know what's really what our real vulnerabilities are. And we're going to um, work with the participants to help inform about those risks and then to give tools and guidance as to how to seek evidence-based elections. And that's where our election results are backed by evidence of voter intent, not just the system outputs. So I'm going to pause there and pass it over to my great colleague and partner in crime, Marilyn Marks from the Coalition for Good Governance.
Thank you, Susan. Let's see if my screen share is working. Does that show a slide as it should?
Yes.
Seeing a slide? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. And I am Marilyn Marks, Coalition for Good Governance. Thank you for doing this, Jennifer and Lisa. As we've all talked about so far, it is clear that Trump is coming after the 2026 elections and will disrupt them. The kinds of things we've already mentioned and we all hear about every day, the gerrymandering, mail ballot restrictions, shortening the time for mail ballot receipts, the deadlines. He's abolished the cybersecurity support from CISA. We're all worried about intimidation at the polling places, voter roll purges, and legal challenges to the result. And something we'll talk about in future sessions, all of these we'll talk about in future sessions that people don't know about too much, is that Trump's allies are in possession of the stolen software for the voting system. How do I get to the next slide here? Here. Recent actions of concern. Some of you may not have seen these, though some have been in the news pretty much. He's seeking full voter registration data, including voters' personal identifying information. He is calling for the decertification of certain voting systems. He's deploying DOJ and DHS for investigations of the current voting systems, voting practices, and using appointed special investigators for now opening up the 2020 files and beginning to do investigations and forensic reviews. That may not sound too scary to you, but in future sessions, we're going to talk about why that can create some real problems for 2026. He is raising the cybersecurity vulnerabilities that are in voting systems. All of this is happening now, but chances are it's going to go in slow motion for a while, I believe, and create last minute chaos for many of these things, justifying all sorts of actions about who runs the elections next year. So we've heard from Jasmine Crockett once. Watch this short clip and see if you think she's right.
I don't think that he wants to make the ballot box accessible. And I don't know that he is above cheating. In fact, I would argue that he is a cheater.
He's definitely not above cheating.
We do know that one of his friends has purchased Dominion. So it's going to be really important for us to educate all states that we can to make sure that their Secretary of States are like, we don't want the Dominion machines. Because I personally believe that ally purchased Dominion so that he could potentially play with the machines, because we know that they're trying to cheat by changing the lines for the midterms. And I think that they're trying to solidify their cheat potentially with the voting machines.
Okay, is that a conspiracy theory, or are there some serious concerns there? If you stick with us, you'll get to know a lot about the answer to that and be able to make your own assessment. Sorry, having a hard time getting to the next slide.
I don't think.
There we go. So as Susan said, there are many pro-democracy groups out there working on incredibly important things: voter registration, physical security of the polling places, mail ballot access, voting information, voter education, redistricting. But we see a big gap. And we see this gap as being, while many people are working to protect the voter and the voter's access to the ballot box, we are working in this project that we are all starting together to make sure that the vote itself is recorded properly and protected. Not only recorded accurately, counted accurately, and the results certified timely and transparently. And many of us have taken for granted that these things are a given. And you may think, oh, my county doesn't really have a problem with that. We ask you to stay tuned and really let's find out where the vulnerabilities are. We think that there is this gap that must be filled. We don't see anybody doing it. We surely encourage other organizations to join us. Access to the ballot box is really being addressed. Long way to go, but verification of that vote is what really protects democracy. So, going over our goals again, as Susan mentioned them in the mission statement, we want to build resilience into our local systems, get out ahead of the absolutely predictable disruptive efforts that are coming. We want to ensure full voter privacy and ballot secrecy that is far more under threat in this coming year and this year than people have realized. We want to make sure that ballots are recorded accurately. That may not sound like it makes too much sense until you begin to understand more about the threat, particularly on touchscreen machines, to the accurate recording of votes. Certainly, then a whole separate section on making sure that the ballots are counted transparently, audited publicly. Audits are not optional. They really need to be required in 2026, and then certainly certified timely and accurately. 2026 is going to demand evidence-based elections. You heard Jasmine Crockett say to Mark Elias, we got to get the evidence to get into court. What we find, and I think people will be surprised at how weak the evidence is today in many of our voting systems. This evidence for 2026 it must be able to withstand court challenges, and it must withstand challenges in the House and Senate. We can have a civics lesson at another time, but remember that the ultimate decision of who takes a House seat or who takes a Senate seat is made in Congress, not by the courts, even after it's gone through the courts. So with very partisan lens making those decisions, the evidence that comes out of the election records has just got to be so perfect and so without question. Business as usual, as we've been doing for the last many decades, taking things for granted, that may be the path for failure. Susan, may I turn this back over to you? And you're muted still, Susan.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the limitations of our existing security safeguards and why more oversight and auditability is needed. Because you've probably heard a lot of narrative and rhetoric and talking points about the security of our voting systems. There are certain promises that are made, and a lot of this has developed kind of as a backlash to or indirect response to Trump's false claims that he actually won the 2020 election. And he alleged that the election had been rigged without any evidence whatsoever. And there was no basis for those allegations. But what we saw in response was a very robust communications campaign to assure everybody that our systems are basically impenetrable. And the truth is more in the middle, because there are real issues that we have with our voting systems that need to be addressed. And if we're not approaching this in a clear-eyed way, we're not going to be, oh boy, my slides aren't moving forward. I'll try it this way. Okay. So we're going to address some of the common myths about election security that people often have been told. And I don't want to get in too much detail here, but we think it's important that we provide the detail later on in the process of the series, so that when people are going out, when participants, when Indivisible members are meeting with their local election officials or elected officials, or with other groups, they're armed with the facts. You can go back and when people say things like, well, I'm not worried about that because the voting machines are never connected to the internet, so isn't it impossible for them to be compromised? That's actually not the case. In some states, some of the machines, the tabulators, actually are connected to the internet. In some places, unfortunately, they still use wireless modems. This is an issue that at Free Speech for People, we have been long lobbying and advocating against, and we're actually in a lawsuit now with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission over that issue. Then there's other states where there's actual internet voting. So there are internet-based threats that shouldn't be discounted. But furthermore, we can't discount the possibility that a corrupted insider working on behalf of a corrupt official might try and get in and compromise voting equipment. This is recognized in the rest of the world of cybersecurity as one of the biggest threats is insider threat. Yet when it comes to elections, there's a certain politeness about we can't assume that election officials might be corrupted in a way that that could happen. But as Marilyn alluded to, there was quite a big, like the biggest election security scandal that you've probably never heard of, which was the breaching of election equipment in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Michigan, by operatives working on behalf of lawyers associated with the Trump campaign in 2021 and 2022. And during that process, they got copies of the voting system software. So that introduces a whole new level of vulnerabilities and threats. But it's an example of why we can't just say, well, we don't have to worry about insiders possibly tampering with equipment. We also hear voting machines are rigorously tested and certified. I don't want to run on, like I said, I can't go into this too much detail. But just as a short fact, all of the systems that are in place right now are tested and certified to standards that were developed in 2005. So they are profoundly out of date, and are not set to meet the security challenges of 2025, if they were set 20 years ago. We also hear machines are tested before each election. Even though that happens, there can still be mistakes in programming that aren't caught in the testing. And then we have examples of machines miscounting. And then when we are able to go back, use the evidence, the paper ballots, correct the count. And we also hear that all elections are audited. And this is the one that I sticks in my craw the most, because not all election audits are equal. Not all states have sufficient audits. For example, some states will audit only one contest on the ballot and then tell you that the elections are audited. Well, if that isn't the contest that is close, or you're concerned about, that audit really doesn't mean anything. We also have cases like in my home state of New York, we have post-election audits, and on the books they look pretty good. But when you go to find out the results of the audit, if you have to put in a public records request, all it gives you is a certificate saying that the audit was conducted and that any discrepancies were rectified. They don't tell you what the discrepancies were, how they decided that they could be reconciled. There's no information. So that is not a transparent audit. And when we're looking for audits to actually give us evidence of our elections, that's not going to cut it. So we're going to be fighting for better audits, transparent audits, and that's where people power comes in. I'm going to pause there and pass it over to Marilyn.
Okay. You got my slide up again. You can see that. All right. There's a lot of work to be done. And some of it sounds like, oh, that decision would be made by my legislature or the Secretary of State. Actually, the important decisions, for the most part, are being made, and this is a generality now, not everywhere, are being made in your local county. Your local county elections officials generally have a lot more power than they fess up to. And they're generally choosing the equipment that you're voting on. They are setting the security standards, or at least anything over what the minimum that the state requires. And they have a lot of discretion on this. Very few of them are doing what they should be doing to protect an environment that we are in. They tend to set the priorities and the policies for audits, recounts, public oversight. And there are things that local boards can do beyond the exact minimum. They can do discretionary audits in many places, analysis, deep canvassing work, and recounts, doing the work beyond the minimums. And what we want to do through the series is train the participants to engage with their local election boards, understand the practices, understand what the best practices are, and to have you engage with your local election officials to ask them to adopt the best practices over the next few months. But it is going to take a lot of research on your part, a lot of training hours. Unlike what Jasmine Crockett says, we're not just asking for one day, we're asking for a lot of hours of training, learning what to do, learning how to engage, and learning what the pushback you're going to get when we do this, but also how incredibly important it is in building that record that you heard Mark Elias, Jasmine Crockett, and Susan talk about. That record that we've got to have to be able to withstand the attacks that the results, the wins are going to get. It's going to take some learning of your own state and local ordinances and laws, identifying who are the decision makers in your county, who appoints those board members. In many states, it is the two primary political parties tend to appoint the local boards, but that can vary. Have there been recent partisan shifts in the control of your local board? I can certainly say that we're seeing that in North Carolina. We're seeing it in Georgia as well. And the changes that we're seeing are not favorable toward protecting the integrity of the election. How often are your local meetings held? What kind of public advocacy is permitted in those meetings? One of the good things is usually citizens can go in and really engage with their local election officials because they're findable. It's a lot easier to talk to those guys than it is to your senator. So advocating for secure systems, robust audits, transparent canvassing, and effective citizen oversight of the entire process is what we will be looking for to get commitments from the local county election officials that participants can do this. You and your friends can build teams to do this, to try to protect the election in ways that it may have never been needed before, so that there is end-to-end observation and verification to eliminate any chance or major chances of electronic manipulation and minimize the false claims. So somebody had asked in the chat for my contact information. This is it. Please feel free to contact me. Although, as Jennifer says, there's going to be a central contact information. I'm happy to send you a copy of these slides, but I'll also send you some homework on a reading list. Susan and I have put together a list of articles that has to do with some of the things she talked about, and I have, particularly as it relates to the theft of the voting system equipment, the request that we've made to the government to try to investigate and that sort of thing in the previous administration. Anyway, we can send you a lot of information for background and look forward to doing that. Okay, Susan, let me turn this back to you.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna go back to share my slides again. And I saw I saw there's some um concern about trying that there's been a reluctance among leaders to actually address this issue, which is why we're doing this webinar, because we are going to be the leaders we need. I work with a lot of other big democracy groups in coalitions, and they do a lot of great work, but some of them are very allergic to this topic. And so we figure we will build the groundswell from the bottom up, where the people will demand it, and we'll lead them from the grassroots. So I just wanted to just in this last bit to um, let you guys know, we know that this is a huge country. We are not going to be able to blanket the entire thing. We need, it's all hands on deck, but there's no way we're going to be able to cover everything. So we're going to focus on the highest risk jurisdictions by looking at which places have the most competitive House, Senate, or statewide contests. And then also layer on that what kind of technology is in use, how vulnerable is that is based on what we know about the vulnerabilities, what kind of transparency and resilience is already in place with the way the systems are run there. And some people are working on an assessment tool to provide use criteria to document these different elements of your local county or jurisdiction, and then identify points for improvement, and where you can actually leverage the leadership or people you can work with. So that will be a sort of county snapshot survey, which we hope to be able to distribute so that before session 2, people have a chance to look it over and start collecting some of this information about who the decision makers are in their county, what sort of equipment is in use, how the audit and canvass procedures are conducted, and what the public access and observation policies are, because we might need to be collecting our own information about the audits if they're not being done in a transparent way. We might be needing to collect information about the poll tapes that are posted on election night that should provide evidence. So if your county is actually one where there's not a competitive race and isn't a lot of concerns, you might want to adopt another county in another place and help the people in that county with their outreach and their effort. So I think I'm going back to Lisa at this point. And I turn it over to you because I think Lisa's got some remarks for wrap up, and then we'll go to questions.
Great. Thanks, Susan. I'm Lisa Ferino. I'm with Indivisible Action Coalition and the Protect the Vote team within IAC. Marilyn and Susan have created a series of training sessions, several training sessions that will start quite soon and go right through the holidays season, because this is such an urgent issue. We just can't wait until January to start this work. We'll send you the registration info for those training webinars in our follow-up email after this intro webinar. The first 2 are tentatively set for Monday, November 24th and Monday, December 1st, tentatively, and we'll keep you posted in follow-ups. Participants will progress carefully from learning to diagnosing problems to engaging and then documenting their progress. As you consider this project among all your other activities, I know you're all long-term activists at this point, consider who else could join us in these training webinars. Who in your activist circles has the personal attributes that dovetail with the demands of this work? This project requires a serious commitment. You'll need to educate yourselves about local practices and search for local allies, while also knowing how to address misinformation and how to interact with your local elections officials. Making a real commitment is vital to the project. It will be detailed but rewarding work, and eventually you could be making a big difference in the security of our elections. Our goal is to make sure that by February 2026, just around the corner, county level advocacy would be underway, so policy or procedural changes can be implemented well before the elections. These sessions will provide tools, templates, and expert guidance from the Coalition for Good Governance and Free Speech for People. You'll be guided every step of the way by the experts who know this issue inside out. We'll work with you until you are truly trained up. This is a team effort. We have needed and will need the protest action that we've all engaged in. And now we also need this specific work on election protection. We hope you're inspired to join us. In the meantime, if you have any questions or input for us, you can email the Protect the Ballot team, and the address, I put it in the chat, the email address, but I'll put it there again in just a minute. And so with that, we'll now go to the
I just want
Q&A.
to I just want to say, Lisa, we're finding that because the info at protecttheballot.com is it's a new domain. We just started it. I think it's going to people's junk, so you might want to put it in your, so it doesn't go there.
Okay.
I want to do that alert because we were sending stuff out, like the reminders, because it was just too many emails. We did not expect 600 people to register. It's fantastic. And so we had to actually create something new, like instantly. And so we just want to make sure that you get the follow-up email, because it will be coming from info@protect-the-ballot.com.
Right. Look for it in the next day or so, and do check your spam or junk folder. Okay. We'll go to the Q&A session now for the next 20 minutes or so. We will end this webinar as promised in 20 minutes, but if there are diehards out there who want to go beyond the 1 hour, we're happy to stay on for extra time. Again, put your questions in the chat and start it with ask. Start your question with ask. Okay, I'm tossing it over to Jean Dufort. Go ahead, Jean.
Thank you. And I am a proud founding member of Indivisible Georgia District 10 and have worked with Marilyn and Susan both for a long time. I'm going to start with a clarifying question. Several people have asked some version of this, but here's what Gwen said. Should our energies be put towards registering Democrats and getting them out to vote? Because with a high turnout, it becomes more difficult to challenge outcomes. So who wants to handle that?
Susan.
I will say I'm a nonpartisan, so we are not answering any partisan questions.
Okay.
So
Well, Susan, I will, and I'm the same here, but I don't look at that as a partisan question. I'll give it a try and you follow up on this. That is kind of a common myth that, if we have enough people to vote, it will be hard for the bad guys to hack the system. No, it doesn't really. It's so sophisticated these days that hackers can, turn up the volume with no effort whatsoever. And there's really no such thing as being able to outnumber the hackers here. All it takes is a few little keystrokes, and any election can be hacked and overturned. And I think as you go with us through the next few weeks, you're going to be surprised, I think, at just how vulnerable our systems are. And although you may live in a district that you may not have heard that the software had been stolen, is in the hands of Trump allies and who knows who, you may be surprised when you learn the details of that and just how dangerous a situation that creates for us. Susan, how would you enhance what I said?
Well, I think you can't I think what Marilyn's saying is right, that the idea that I will say that if you're looking at something, before an election and it's somebody's running 20 points ahead, it will make it harder if they're running 20 points ahead in the polls. But when you start to get closer, then I've often seen, and Marilyn can say this, I can talk about this more because this is actually her story, that people will make up justifications for why an election swung a certain way. And I will give her example. There was a small city election in DeKalb County, Georgia, where the incumbent was expected to win. The votes came back. She lost. She and her husband looked at the results and saw that in their own individual precinct, where they both knew they had voted for her, she had received 0 votes. So they demanded a full hand count and found out that she'd actually won. So, if it's going to be anything but a complete blowout, I don't want to rely on that. But we're nonpartisan.
And I just want to add one more thing to that. It was really interesting, even though the results seemed bizarre. Um, her friends, her supporters, she happened to be a Democrat, were telling me, Marilyn, she made a big mistake just a couple of days before the election. She said something really improper. People thought that accounts for her not getting these votes. And everyone justified that the numbers were correct as reported. Turns out that she actually won by a huge margin, but people were ready to just believe whatever numbers came out of the machine. We've seen that type of thing happen too many times.
Yeah. And this wasn't malfeasance, it was a programming error, but that's why it demanded going back and looking at the evidence of voter intent with the paper ballots.
There are several people asking, if you live in a really blue state or a really blue area, how can you make an impact? And I think you foreshadowed that, but let's just emphasize it, how that's going to be possible.
Right. As we go through the group exercise ultimately of figuring out where the high risk jurisdictions are, either states or counties, there will be work that people can do to volunteer remotely, really, with some of the high risk areas. There is so much data to look at, to study, to even some election boards actually Zoom their meetings. You can adopt a county and help with your local teammates there. So there will be ways to people who are living in safe districts help people who are living in high risk districts.
Okay.
And I'll just add, I think there is going to be, an element of education that we're going to talk about why we need to be doing this. The more people that have this information, the better, because as I mentioned, we have been fed a narrative for a long time. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. But we actually really need to be a little worried, like Jasmine Crockett says, because we can't assume anything about the security of our systems that we have been assuming all along
Yeah.
with the threat we're facing now. Sorry, Cheek, go ahead.
Good. No, that's fine. There are also this is clearly a very educated group, or at least some people on this are educated, because we're getting props out for groups like Verified Voting, groups that organize lawyers. So the question is, how can this effort partner with and leverage some of the existing groups that have been working on things? So talk.
Well, I'm going to let Susan take the hard part of the question, but I'm going to say that what we said about seeing a gap We are seeing a serious gap. It has not been easy to get the traditional pro-democracy organizations in the last 5 years, quite frankly. Many of those organizations have shied away from this topic. It's become a third rail. Organizations that used to pound the table against electronic voting have become very shy about it because now there's this stigma of if you talk about it, then you're somehow saying that the 2020 election was stolen. So we don't see many people in that space. We would love for them to come join this effort. Absolutely love them. If you've got contacts that you can be influential with them, we want them to do it. And please invite them. But right now, that's why we're doing this, is because there is a gap that others have shied away from. Susan, you can probably say more about that, given how many of those you collaborate with all the time.
Yeah. I used to work for verified voting. I worked for verified voting for 10 years. And I still work with verified voting on we collaborated on a number of different initiatives. I was on a panel last night with Pam Smith. I consider her a close friend, who's the president of verified voting. And we just submitted a letter that I drafted a letter to the editor about something which she signed on. We are part of a coalition with the Brennan Center, Verified Voting, Common Cause, and Public Citizen on election security specific to internet voting. But as Marilyn said, there is a real reluctance from some of the bigger groups to talk about some of these things that we're going to talk about here. So and they have been approached, and they're all more than welcome. The more the merrier. But we feel that this is a point where we can't hide the truth about where we might be vulnerable, when we need to kind of hit it head on and be proactive and address it.
Susan, I would add one more thing. Many of those organizations tend to focus at a federal and a state, like legislative level. And not many of them are focused on, like Indivisible teams are, what I can do locally. What difference can I make here in my county? And I think that makes this group and its colleagues unique and well positioned to do this work.
Good. April makes an interesting observation, which I'd like you to comment back on. There's a rule in cybersecurity realm of zero trust, but we don't apply that to election computers. Most contests aren't verified by hand audit of paper ballots, but we rely on computers to check computers. Is that a good plan?
No, April 100. Yes, very educated group here, clearly. Yeah, zero trust in computers. I don't know why we have such a hard time translating that to the election space, but that's 100% right. No notes. I can't can't disagree with anything except endorse. And Marilyn, if you want to add anything.
I have nothing to add. You were right.
Okay. Just for advice, we're getting a lot of asks if we can get the materials, and I think the answer is yes. We're going to talk about a way to make the videos of each of these sessions available to you. One of the requests for the team to think about is, can we condense this even further into a short that can be used as an introductory locally if somebody's got a group they want to interest in getting engaged? Like, can we create a teaser thing? And that's maybe something for us all to think about. Frankly, it was a lot of work to get to tonight. So I'm not going to ask these people for anything more. That's just a comment.
It's a good idea, though.
I think it's a terrific idea. We have a specific question. I think you alluded to it a little bit, Marilyn, about the new ownership of Dominion. And what challenges does that present? Now, I know we teased that you're going to get a lot of information at a future session, but do you want to add even a little bit more to get people interested?
I'll add a little bit more. In the meantime, I will put again in the email in the chat my email address, and we can get you my slides, and I can send you Susan's slides tonight or tomorrow. And but that'll be a fast way to get them for you. But in terms of the Dominion purchase, yes, the Dominion purchase was made by somebody who certainly seems to be something of a partisan. He used to be closely allied with Ed Martin. Ed Martin is the appointee in the DOJ now in charge of the weaponization unit. Ed Martin is already starting a forensic type work, or trying to, in Georgia for the 2020 election. They are very much, aware of voting system vulnerabilities. Also, what we will tell you about in our future sessions is how knowing the electronic poll book company that Scott Leyendecker, the new owner of Dominion, he owns that. He now owns Dominion. What we will share with you in detail is some of the dangers to voter privacy and ballot secrecy when you start to combine the data in both of those systems. We can't, of course, say what their plans are. We have no reason to believe that they are going to do anything that is partisan oriented, but we can tell you a lot. Susan and I can tell you a lot, as well as the experts that we are going to invite on for one or two of these sessions, who have examined the Dominion software as part of the Curling v. Raffensperger case that I've been working on for the last 8 years, where we have challenged in Georgia in federal court the Dominion voting system long before it was anything that the MAGA people cared about. But we've challenged the touchscreen Dominion voting system, and we continue to do work on it and find more and more very concerning vulnerabilities every day. So we'll talk about the problems that were inherent in Dominion before, how widespread those problems are across the nation, and then what new risk does this business combination bring?
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'm just going to add, I put an op-ed that I wrote for Slate in the chat, and if you might be interested in reading that, because it's very concerning that somebody who has a announced allegiance to one party is now owning this voting system company that has proprietary software and programs the ballots. But it's not the first time. We've seen this happen before. ES&S, the biggest voting system company in the country, has roots with a Republican senator and who was an investor, and the person who created the private equity company that funds it is also a Republican. So this is why we need to have evidence of voters' intent in the form of the paper ballots. I saw somebody saying that we need to be making sure that we have audits, and the audits that we have right now are not robust enough. So it should be trust but verify. I actually wrote a report called "Don't Just Trust, Always Verify" about the audit practices in the swing states and where they fall short. If you're interested, it's on our website.
Someone asked about whether Dominion only has touchscreens, and want to make clear that the vast majority of their installations are actually hand-marked paper ballots. tabulated by scanners, but those scanners are also extremely vulnerable. We've learned more and more about that as we've examined the system. And in fact, Susan and I were out at DEF CON where there were members of our team who, and I was part of that team, who demonstrated an incredibly easy hack of the Dominion voting system that works not only just for the touchscreens, but also on the scanners. Going back to Susan's point of that's why we must be verifying whatever the electronic tabulation is. We are saying we want electronic tabulation, but we want to use manual test of those tabulation to ensure that the outcomes were correct. The key difference, and we'll talk about this more in a future session, is when you're voting on a touchscreen, you cannot be sure of how that vote is recorded. When you vote by hand on a paper ballot, coloring in an oval, you know how that vote was recorded. We just have to make sure it was counted right. In the case of touchscreens, you've got to make sure it was both recorded correctly and counted correctly.
That's right. There's a couple of people who have been asking about the quote unquote statistical anomaly theories of the last presidential election that have been circulating. And sort of how can we move forward if we don't really understand that? And I'm going to put a little teaser in that basically says this project is about collecting sufficient evidence to be sure, not only running statistical anomalies. But why don't the two of you comment on, do we look backward or do we prepare for what's to come?
Susan, you want to start with some of those claims that are out there?
Yeah, I have seen some of the statistical analysis that show down ballot contests incongruous with the top of the ticket, and that definitely gives me all sorts of questions. But that's not evidence. That's not evidence of anything happening. It's an anomaly or an irregularity potentially. Maybe it was caused by some sort of miscount caused by an unknown reason, but it in itself is not evidence. That's why we want to be looking at the voter verified paper ballots, which are evidence of voter intent in as many ways as possible. And I just want to make sure, if this didn't come across clearly, we have 50 states, the laws about canvassing and post-election audits, and recounts are different everywhere. So it's going to be different everywhere. This is not going to be a one size fits all process, and some jurisdictions will be able to achieve more and some will hit more walls, but we want to do the best we can everywhere. So it's concerning, but it's not evidence, I guess.
And I guess I would add one more point. It's just really reinforcing what Susan said. It's ridiculous that we are sitting here a year later and people still have to have concerns about who really won, and 2020 the same way. I will tell you, in Georgia, it's not there are still legitimate questions about not who won. I think we know that Biden won, but I will tell you that there are a lot of legitimate open questions in Georgia in 2020. I'm sure that could be true in other places as well. It's ridiculous that we are here 5 years later without the verifiable record that's open for all to see and to satisfy themselves. That's why we want to get out ahead of what Trump can do and to make our systems that are in use either become more resilient. They're easy things that can be done to become more resilient, to defend against the attacks, so that next November we will not be sitting here saying, well, did Ossoff not win? Did he really lose? Or the other side saying, did he really win? So that's what this entire exercise is about. And no, we don't have to know what happened in 2020 or 2024 in order to know what to do. We know the solutions. And they're
And if you
straightforward.
for this and sign up for future sessions, you'll know too. So that's the plug to come on back. And I'm going to turn it over. I'm not sure to Jennifer or Lisa, but we're going to wrap up the first hour and then stay open for some questions if you've got them.